Hello and welcome back to the Agribusiness Academy podcast. We got an exciting podcast today, and a little bit of a break from our series of looking at business models, as we're joined by Afton Halloran, a consultant in sustainable food systems, and we're going to learn all about her background, her journey, and dig into some of her expertise. I'm also joined by Tatiana LeGrand, who is a lead coordinator here at Agribusiness Academy, who's going to help me explore some of Afton's thoughts and opinions and some of her experience. So, hello to you both.
Hello.
Hello, Tom and Afton.
So, I think the best thing to do would be to get into the questions and give Afton a much better chance to introduce herself than I could do justice to. So, Afton, can you tell us a little bit about your journey and your maybe some of the things that you've become an expert in over the years?
Yeah. Well, it's an interesting journey, I think, because it hasn't been kind of a very straightforward one. So there's been a lot of kind of horizontal and vertical moves. So it really starts with kind of being very interested in seeing the food and agricultural systems as a whole. So not just looking at one specific side, for example, agricultural production, or looking at the consumption side specifically, but really being curious about the interlinkages between all of the different components of a food system. And so I've been working on different projects related to urban agriculture and how to basically, grow food in the city, in many different places of the world, in both, let's say, in Africa and in Europe, and also in North America. And understanding how this could be perhaps a future form of food production, and how we can help foster those kinds of models and ensure that they're actually built into urban planning. So that's kind of one of the major experiences that I've had. Also, I've been working a lot in the area of future foods. So for about 6 years, I've been working with the topic of edible insects and looking at production systems and kind of understanding the environmental impacts of insect production, how farmers might adopt these kinds of new production systems, and also trying to understand how insect production fits into the overall food system. So that also then kind of leads me to another area of expertise that I've gained over the years, is looking at food policy, because food, and whenever we talk about food, we also have to think about the kind of policies, the legislation, the rules, the regulations that govern these kinds of systems. So because I prefer to think very systematically and think in the whole kind of the big picture, but also zeroing into the certain aspects. So I kind of zoom in and zoom out a lot in my work. This is kind of led me into the policy world, because in actually, when you think about it, a lot of people don't consider policy to be very interesting, but actually it really, when we come to looking at innovation in the food systems, it's an area that we really need to pay attention to. So these are kind of core areas that I've been working with now, and I'm always like very, very curious to know more about more areas of the food system. So I'm constantly adding to this kind of journey that I've been on, but always with this kind of food centric focus, because I think that's my lens of how I see the world.
Yeah, and so a lot of your policy work is now in Denmark, and is that Northern Europe as well, or you more international than just Denmark? How is that?
Yeah, so I've been working on the issue of policy in different regions. So my most current work is in the Nordic region, and looking at kind of the most innovative examples of food policy that have been developed by the 5 Nordic countries. So just so your listeners kind of are on the same page, that the 5 Nordic countries represent so Iceland, Norway, Sweden, Finland, and Denmark. And so these countries combined form the Nordic region. And so I've been working with an intergovernmental organization called the Nordic Council of Ministers, and really defining kind of what are the characteristics of innovative food policy, and so documenting the past, looking at the present and where we are today, but also trying to understand where we're going in the future. Because I think the future of food policy is really exciting, because when we talk about food nowadays, things are changing so incredibly fast. We're eating new kinds of foods that in our cultures we'd never consumed before. Perhaps in other cultures, yes, but we're also needing to change the way we eat, the way we produce our food. So policy is more relevant than ever, and I think it will also define the future of food. So I really like to work in that space.
And are those countries, these Nordic countries, as forward thinking in food and ag as they are in the kind of world leaders in a lot of areas, aren't they, in terms of the environment and equal rights and those kind of things? So is that the same in terms of food and agriculture?
Yeah, well, one thing about the kind of food policy that I think is really interesting in this region is that, as we kind of see, if we look at different policies independently, it's maybe harder to see the whole picture. But when you start to look at kind of this total, like, let's say, buffet of different policies that have happened, have occurred or been built up over the past, you can see that there's quite a interesting level of sophistication there. So the policies that I've been looking at are related to nutritional policies related to public meals, to food waste, also looking at kind of sustainable food consumption into the future, so looking at low environmental impact diets. So these are some of the areas where we've been kind of investigating, and to understand, how is this region, different from other countries? What are things that we have been doing well and could share with the world, but also to use this opportunity to kind of see the holes as well, and to see where other countries can, and other regions of the world can offer, their expertise. So I would say what makes policy really interesting and innovative in a very modern context is when you start to look across or collaborations across ministries. So we can't, for me, we can no longer operate in a space where it's just the Ministry of Agriculture, let's say, or Agriculture and Food, making decisions about our production consumption models. We also need to involve, ministries of finance, ministries of health, ministries of environment, because the goal really is the same. I mean, whether what you produce will affect what you consume, and we can no longer see these as separate. So I think that's where, for me, of this having this ability to kind of go in and see the very, the big picture level, but then to kind of go in and look on a much more pinpointed level of maybe a certain area, let's say food waste, for example, and or the future foods and or novel foods. So that's kind of where I'm at right now.
This is very interesting, Afton, and I think you're absolutely right that food policy work is crucial right now, especially with the amount of innovation that we're seeing in this space. And this is something that Agribusiness Academy is working on, and we see all those exciting business models. But then once you start thinking about it, how is the product going to be regulated? How is it going to work that consumers start accepting these certain foods and products? So I think your work is very relevant to what is happening right now in this space.
And I just wanted to add to that and say, once again, policy often gets kind of has a bad rap, I suppose, because often it's seen as synonymous with bureaucracy and with some things that are happening at a slower pace, let's say, than innovation and business development. And I think that the future of food policy is really to work in public-private partnerships and to see that we can't just leave the creation of policy in the hands of only one group, let's say just the government, but the government also needs to be advised on how to proceed into the future. So I think here one really fantastic example is looking at the startups, for example, in the space of food related startups. And we're having a huge boom in the Nordic region, and also you see this in other areas of the world, where more and more companies are really trying to disrupt the food system, and they need support in order to help get their ideas from just an ideation kind of stage to making it a reality. So that's where policy comes in, and so even on a larger level, the EU level, there's been some changes in recent years to novel food policy. So when you are putting new foods on the European market that have not previously been consumed in this region, that used to take a longer time. And so within the European Union, there's been a process that has changed and become a little bit quicker than it was before, in light of a very much a changing system that needs to be more reactive to be able to create policies that are modern and that are tailored to kind of the needs of our everyday lifestyles nowadays, but also to still take that precautionary perspective to realize that some things we have to have a due diligence process to make sure that the things that we're consuming are safe and that they go through the right kinds of regulations and checks and balances before they actually reach the consumer. So I think that food policy is an area that a lot of people don't consider, and it's certainly changing. And it means different things in different regions of the world. And what I see in my travels and experiences in many other countries is that it's not just the Nordic region that's looking at food policy in a different way, but it's also in Asia and Africa and North America, South America, kind of see that policy can be a tool to create really important changes in society, and also for human health, for planetary health, for and kind of the greater society. So I think that this is I can't emphasize this enough, that it's such a critical area that that we all in the end can contribute to in one way or another, especially in terms of businesses.
Great, thank you for such a kind of thorough introduction to what you do, and also kind of, I guess, the broader context. My job is to extract as much of your kind of knowledge and insight within the next 30 or 40 minutes, and I think it feels like we could go on for days, but so we might have to kind of cut off, and then we can always pick up another time. But if I could start to delve into some of the questions that we've kind of prepared and thought that we'd like to gain your thoughts on, and this kind of picks up on something you said already. So you've used the terms future foods and novel foods, I think, already, and people say new food as well. Can you help us understand how those are defined, and if there's a kind of framework that those fall into?
Yeah, so this is a fantastic question, really, because I think we lack a framework, because what is considered a future food in one region of the world could just be an everyday traditional food in another. So what is I can kind of give some characteristics of future foods from let's say a Western perspective. I think maybe we can start there. So often, future foods are classified as foods that have a low environmental impact, foods that are basically kind of new to the market, things that we haven't previously consumed. They're foods that perhaps have had some kind of tradition. So maybe they were consumed in one region of the world before, that they have some kind of properties that could be beneficial to the consumer. So let's say maybe they're high in protein, or they're high in iron, or something like this. And also, I think it's for another one of the characteristics would really be that often they have very different business models behind them, or they're coming from startup companies, or if from in the beginning, and then they kind of catch on later on with larger corporates taking them up. But I think it's often what we see in the Western world is that future foods are kind of bubble up from really the bottom up, and then they kind of become institutionalized over time. So just to give some examples of what that could be, we have, for example, the insects is a really, really good kind of example right now, because I think that, for a lot of people, it's not something we're familiar with, but we know it has, in terms of nutritional quality, that it's very good. We know it's good for the planet. We know we should probably be eating more of it. But at the same time, it's not really on the markets. It's harder to access compared to other foods. Another good example is like seaweed, or macro and microalgae. So also like things like spirulina. And once again, these are all foods that have been consumed in many other cultures outside of our own. And have been an integrated part of human diets for a long time. But it's simply that we haven't, or we forgot about them, or we have simply never had access to them before, because maybe they've come from a different part of the world. So I think this is the lack of framework makes this area a little bit kind of cloudy. And I think also, going back to what I was talking about before in relation to regulating this kind of space, it's certainly an interesting area, because we are needing often to write new policies that will accommodate these kinds of future foods. So I hope that kind of gives a good overview of what that might look like. Some other people would say future foods could be also lab grown meat, or clean meat, or cultured meat that goes under different titles. It doesn't have to be a product that is necessarily whole and can be grown in a natural environment. It could also be something that we are we are growing in a more lab setting as well. So this is future foods is a huge and very vast area that I think we're only now kind of trying to define what that looks like and the characteristics of these foods.
This is very interesting, Afton. I think it is also great to see that some of these foods are really picking up attention these days. One question that I had for you to follow up is, how about the novel ingredients? So let's say we're talking about a standard product, for example, some flour mix for pancakes or cookies. And what about adding a novel ingredient to it, like pea protein powder or something like that? Would that be still a novel food, or what would that be in terms of the framework of understanding what these products are?
Yeah, so I think in a way, this product, let's say, it's if you were marketing that product, you would really market it on the basis of that ingredient, because you're changing something, you're substituting, or you're adding value to the product. So this it really depends on, I think this is really up to the company, who kind of to know their market and know how to how to kind of adjust their marketing towards their clients. And so this, I mean, the use of novel or new or future or in terms of foods is really, I think it's up to those who are responsible for marketing of products, because not everyone it thinks that the word novel sounds, you know, appealing because it's
Right.
something new. It's something, it can often be something that, oh, you know, we haven't consumed this before, so maybe, you know, I don't know, is this good for me? I'm not so sure. So I think often this kind of term, we see it maybe not showing up so much on packaging. We would see more statements about, you know, often claims of nutritional quality that is superior to other products, or, you know, that it would be saying that it's superior in terms of its environmental footprint or things like that. So I think that's the way these foods get communicated in the end. But under this umbrella term, they kind of get lumped together there. But I think in their marketing, it's often in order to reach a larger group of people, you need to also to understand that, you know, future or novel is not always appealing to the average consumer.
Definitely. I think this is a very good point, because in the end, what we are seeing in terms of innovation in this space is how companies try to appeal to consumers who might have different dietary preferences, or maybe they are aware of certain allergens in the foods and they're trying to appeal to a certain group of customers in that regard.
Yeah, definitely. It's something that I think, you know, companies really need to do their research and understand that, because there's no kind of hard and fast rule there, especially when you're introducing a new ingredient to the market. You have to often, you know, play around and see how what the reaction is. And a lot of these kind of future foods get incorporated as an ingredient. So perhaps they're not sold on their own as, you know, let's say, going back to the example again of insects, you know, what we're seeing in Europe, North America, for example, is that insects are sold as integrated into existing products, products that are that we're familiar with, where we kind of recognize, but we're substituting, you know, let's say maybe some kind of soy protein or whey powder, and adding, let's say, insect powder in. So it's more of a substitution there, and you're kind of hiding the ingredient, also to avoid a reaction that could potentially be negative, but making it familiar enough for someone to kind of understand that this product should be seen as, you know, a health food product, or a product that is better for the environment. So that's somehow the way that many messages are being kind of, I mean, signals are being sent through how we incorporate these foods into products. And that's what we see at this time. And of course, that's changing, you know. It also changes as consumers get more familiar with products, and that it becomes, you know, not a novel food, but actually an integrated part of our everyday lifestyles. So I think that, you know, one important point here is that often a lot of foods, they start off as novel, and then they become integrated. And there's a lot of great examples of foods. You know, if you think about quinoa, you know, when I was growing up, you know, we never had quinoa. I'd never heard of that. But, you know, when I was when I was, you know, in my 20s, I started seeing on the market, and it first was marketed towards, you know, vegetarians and to a certain kind of subset of the population. But then actually more and more people started using it instead of rice, or instead of bulgur wheat, or other kinds of products of that nature. So it became more normalized. It became integrated into our diets, and it stopped being novel in some ways. And of course that depends from country to country. But I think it's interesting that, to also recognize that there can be a transition. If the more and more integrated something becomes into our lives, the less novel it becomes over time.
Yeah, we sent a team to a Food Matters conference, I think it was called, late last year, and actually probably the majority of exhibitors were doing something in this area. What would you see as the main reason for that kind of large level of focus on these products? Is it food security or lack of food security, or do you see other reasons for it?
I think that the environmental narrative is the strongest in many ways, because there's so much more awareness now than there has ever been in relation to the way we eat in our diets and the impact that it has on that can have on the environment. And so the information is just much more available. I have a scientific background, and working with sustainability in food systems, and having having read a lot of the academic literature before, it was just kind of a small community of people who were concerned about the way that our diets, our modern diets, are influencing the earth. And so what has happened now is that there's just more and more people who understand that, and kind of get it that, okay, I can't just consume everything that I want without without having an impact. So to be a little bit more conscious about that. And so the interest in these products is one, so the kind of planetary health narrative. And I think two is also as a human, so if we look on the more individual level, there's the health kind of narrative as well. And people were also, our lifestyles have changed so drastically in the last 50 years. We're much more sedentary nowadays. We're living lives that are, we're not working in the fields. We're not living kind of agricultural lifestyles in the way that we used to, having really hard labor and requiring certain kinds of food just to sustain us throughout the day. Our kind of diets need to change because we've seen the health impacts, and that has led to obesity. It's led to non-communicable diseases like diabetes, for example, heart disease, and that's something that is hit a lot of people on a very individual level. So if you kind of see this as the bigger picture again, is that our food is a huge part of the problem, but it can also be part of the solution. So I think that that's an interesting area to be in right now, because of that something has to change. And so a lot of businesses, and not only companies, but there's just so much more interest in this than there has ever been before. And I'm also living in a, even though I'm working internationally, I also am very conscious of what's happening around me and where I'm living in Denmark, in the Nordic region. And just from, over less than 10 years, the amount of awareness and consciousness about decisions related to what people are consuming has changed drastically, and also what the products that are on the market as well. So it's exciting times, and also I think that people have also, the middle class is growing, so there's more kind of buying power to choose the things that we hope to reflect the values that we have, whether it's human health or related to the environment. So I think these are two huge factors, but of course there's so many other drivers of this change. But I think that those are really the core ones that I'd like to speak to.
This is great, Afton. I think you're right about the environmental aspect of it, and definitely about the health worries that a lot of consumers are thinking about now. But also something that I found interesting, and that's from looking at the different business models that are in this space is how some companies are appealing to customers, I guess, natural curiosity and also busy lifestyles. For example, meal replacement products, right? So this is where they really can get creative. That can be certain diets friendly, it can be this busy lifestyle friendly product, and it can also be a novel food, right? So I think there is so much happening in this space that is really interesting in terms of the companies kind of offering a solution, as you said, by just trying to be so unconventional in terms of the product development.
Yeah, that's a really important point, and I think to add, to add on to what you said is it's also important to recognize too that we're living in a more globalized world, and our food system has become more globalized. So we have the opportunity to consume something that has been grown and produced and packaged and shipped from another part of the world and consume it in our homes on the other side of the world. So also our taste has changed. We're more, in many ways, we're becoming more open to different flavors, to different experiences that, if you look even 20 years ago, that, we just didn't have that opportunity to taste something that we didn't grow up with, or it would have been a luxury product. So
Exactly.
the lifestyle aspect is a huge factor, and also because there's so many different kinds of lifestyles nowadays. Once again, this is so new, and so there's so many new markets that are opening up to accommodate the fact that everybody has a very different lifestyle, and to mix and match and to consume products that reflect that unique lifestyle that they live in or they live by.
Definitely. And I think one other point is that it is also the storage and food handling and food safety, because we all know how global some of the food safety related scandals have become in recent years, right? And I think that sort of prompted some consumers to think, okay, well, maybe I want to be more conscious about, how my food is being treated, how long I can store it. So that's another point of view in that.
Yeah, so in a recent trip to China, I've been speaking with a lot of different people there who were somehow involved with food and working with food. Just that looking at the kind of developments in terms of how the middle class what they want to consume, how they want to consume food, and how that's often related to the fact that there have been some major scares and scandals, and that people are trying to avoid that by becoming closer to their food. So there's been a boom in organic agriculture, and people who are able to buy directly from farms and support that, or having boxes of food delivered to their doors. So that it represents also the fact that more and more people are living in urban environments, and they've moved away from agricultural landscapes where they can't be sure of oftentimes of what they are consuming. It's just based on trust. But if that trust breaks down, and you have something where people get ill, or people in the fortunate case die, this really breaks down that trust and makes people rethink the food that they're consuming, and also how food is produced. So and that's not just unique to China, that's globally. And it's an interesting, I think it makes it quite interesting for new, like I said before, new markets opening up and new possibilities to bring the consumer closer to their food again.
And that leads quite nicely into what I was going to come on to in terms of looking at these new opportunities. So a lot of our listeners are either from startups or work in areas where they're very interested in startups. Could you tell us a little bit, particularly as someone as kind of well traveled as you are, where you're seeing the right kind of startups in this space, and maybe offer some insights on which ones are scaling and or what's holding them back, if you know, kind of on the other side?
Yes. Well, I mean, this is, yeah, the startup kind of culture. I would say this has become kind of a global culture. There isn't anywhere that I haven't been where you don't see startups in the food space. So, you know, it's not just unique to any one region. So I think the startups that are doing well are you know, addressing some gap in the market, who the ones that are able to basically create a product that can, you know, help somebody live, or help an individual or a family or a couple or whatever kind of permutation it is, to live the life that they want to live, and to also cater to those values and the changing values that we see nowadays. Also, I mean, there's a lot of kind of different levels here, but the global kind of, let's say, growth of the middle class has also opened up so many opportunities for the food sector, because, you know, like I said, different lifestyles, different ways of living, and people want to kind of eat by that, and so I think startups. What makes a kind of successful startup in this space, is to kind of, you know, be forward thinking and try to, those startups who are not able to just ride a trend, but also to understand of, you know, how is the product going to be incorporated into diets, and how, you know, it's going to become something that is like normalized. I think those are the ones that often are more successful, because there's a lot of, I mean, we all know that, you know, a huge percentage of the startups, they can never come, you know, their ideas never come to fruition. So, you know, I think there's a lot of fads right now, and those who are kind of weary of that and try to have a product that will, you know, defy the test of time, let's say, are often have better results. And I think on top of that, I think the startups that are creating products that are really delicious, really, I mean, so simple, such a simple kind of criteria, but people want things that taste good, and, you know, not just that, you know, it's a healthy product or it's good for the environment, but that's something that you can keep on coming back to. So this is one of the issues that I've seen a lot in my work, kind of in the world of edible insects, is that a lot of the products that have been on the market are novelty products, and these products are, you know, bought one time by someone, but they're never bought again, because it was just kind of, perhaps it wasn't a product that was something someone could use in their daily life, or something they were able to kind of understand how to use it. And so at the, you know, they died. It's just a gift, a joke, something that you can give to someone and for Christmas or something like that. But you know, my concern there is that, you know, what kind of impact do you have if it's just a one-off thing. So that's also a really important aspect of a success criteria, I think, is just to make something that is great tasting, and that people can see themselves buying again and again and again.
And I was going to lead on to kind of asking you about investment in that area as well. In that we work with a lot of investors who are trying to pick out these you know, the companies that have a future from that novelty type company, as you've said. And I guess for many investors, they're not they're not an expert like you in terms of knowing what's a trend and what's what's a change, I guess. Is there anything that you can think that kind of that we could offer to them as an insight for understanding the commercial and sustainability potential of the companies?
Yeah, I think the companies that are also working on kind of changing food culture. So it's not just about, I mean, there's kind of that added layer of complexity, is that you can't just produce a product and hope that a consumer is going to accept it, right? There's so much more to that. It's not just about marketing, but it's also about changing food culture, helping people to see that food in a recipe, to be able to imagine themselves, cooking these things for their families. So one of the kind of successful maybe elements there too is who are they working with? Are they working with chefs? Are they working with food service professionals, or are they, how large is their scope? Who is the target audience for this? If it's just for individual consumers, you might want to understand what is the market for that product, because I think it's a small error, a major error actually, that a lot of startups are doing, is that they say, wow, there's a huge boom, this is going to be a very large industry in future foods, but then they don't understand that this takes time to change food culture. So to also not just ride this trend, but to be an active part of changing that culture. So I think it's something that I'm constantly keeping my eye on, and to see, is this a short-lived trend, or is this really going to hold on for some time? And that's hard to it's a hard one to measure, and I think that's where you have to work with experts who really know kind of field quite well. So not just maybe future foods, but specific foods like algae or insects, or meat substitutes and things like that. So yeah, consumers are fickle creatures, and we intend to do things that we say we like to do things and change things or eat different things, and often we don't. So to understand that, and to make it easier for people to adopt new habits is a pretty critical part, I think, about the future food kind of integration.
I would like to follow up on two things. I think you're absolutely right about the value of partnerships, like working with the chefs, for example, that you mentioned, and how companies can try to enhance this flavor profile by working with this constant feedback of the consumers, for example, right? And it made me think of this company called, I think, Beyond Burger. Like, they're releasing the third version of their product, which is a result of the feedback that they've been getting. And the other thing I kept thinking about is also how, in the space of product innovation and I guess the manufacturing process itself, how important it is to have all the right experts, right? So as you are saying, it is the flavor. And yes, I mean, of course it is the price, of course it is the accessibility and all other factors, but ultimately, are you going to eat it or not? And I think, you're right that this is something that companies can maybe encourage their consumers to give them feedback and kind of build this community of followers. And I think we've been seeing, as Agribusiness Academy, this actually happening. Some companies that we've reviewed the business models from, they kind of say, well, if you get our product, please let us know what you think, and we will work on that. And I think it's a great value addition right there.
Yeah, I mean that really goes back to another point, is that it's a iterative process. And once you create a product, and this is really important for startups, is like once you work on a product, and oftentimes startups think that you create something and you put it on the market, but you have to constantly be testing and trying new things, and you know adapting to the feedback that you get. And I think it's really oftentimes it's the hardest part, and having this kind of brutal reality of sometimes what you think is really matching a market demand is not valid for certain reasons. And so I think it can save a lot of trouble in the end, once your product gets on the market, if it's not going to be consumed regularly, and it's just seen as something that is, like I said, novel, and not like a novelty product, like a one-time kind of use, then you don't make it too far. So what I've in some of the seminars that I've been in recently is like a lot of coaching to startups, and saying keep on testing and trying and asking feedback, and then you will, it seems like it's kind of annoying process, but actually it's the best thing you can do before having something on the market, because then you're less likely to fail.
I know we're pressed for time, so if I could just ask you one more kind of key question, Afton. Tatiana mentioned Beyond Burger, and I know it made me wonder whether there are particular companies that stand out to you as maybe your favorites, or companies that are doing something creative or different with either their distribution model or their value proposition. What's kind of standing out to you within this area?
Wow. I think that's a tough one.
Oh yeah,
Because
maybe there's too many.
yeah, I think there's so many different things going on. And
How
what
about in terms
stands
of
yeah.
something that's kind of really really different in terms of the way that they're distributing their product? Is there anything that you can think of in that respect?
Yeah, what I think is really interesting is how we see certain companies that are just targeting, the food service industry. So they're actually not, first of all, they're not making their products available to the individual shopper, but actually rolling them out with restaurant chains, or with catering services or things like that. So that's, I mean, the Beyond Burger has been, I think for me, is an interesting case that I believe, so not the Beyond Burger, the what's it called? The other, the one that bleeds. Is that the Beyond Burger? I mix them up sometimes.
I can't help you. Maybe Tatiana will know.
Okay. Tatiana, do you know the name of this burger that bleeds? That it's a vegetarian burger.
Maybe she's frantically Googling.
Maybe, yeah. Impossible Burger.
Okay, you got it.
Yeah, so okay, what I think there is that, something like the Impossible Burger, it has been very interesting because they have only allowed certain people to purchase and cook the burger, because it has to be cooked in a certain way in order to be delicious. And so then you're offering this training, and you're also reaching a larger amount of people by working with food service chains. And at the same time, you're kind of ensuring that the overall experience of the person who's eating that burger, or that this kind of vegetarian burger it's supposed to mimic a real beef patty, will have a similar experience to someone on the other side of the country. And so because it's, otherwise if you prepare it incorrectly, it won't taste the same. And so then people might have a bad perception of this product. So I think that for me is having is a very different model, because a lot of times things are rolled out, both to food service professionals and to the and to individual shoppers at the same time. And everybody's having a different kind of user experience there. But to just work with kind of trained professionals to help them prepare, and then once that's accepted, to also see how you could potentially roll that out to households at a later stage, is after people have gotten a taste of this, is a very interesting approach. So I think that that's an interesting model that for me has been kind of that stood out. And there's so many other ones, but I think in the sake of time that I should stop there.
I think those are great insights, and it is good to hear that you've been seeing these developments as well, and how companies are facing this dilemma of, well, I have my product, but what next? And something that we've been seeing a lot as well is the uptake of the distribution model, which relies on subscription, for example. And I don't know how common it is now with novel foods more specifically, but at least the plant-based foods, I think, are really getting some attention in that regard. Like, well, I know of the subscription company called Purple Carrot, which you probably know of it too. So I think that's been interesting, and I think there are also now in some large cities companies that offer meal services. So it's been very good to see how unconventional the solutions are that these companies are offering. So do you think that this kind of innovations are going to drive this space, or do you think it is sustainability, for example, that would kind of drive the growth of the sector?
Yeah, so I think they go hand in hand, because innovation can only happen when we have some kind of, constraint or challenge, right? And so, the sustainability kind of constraint is a massive one. So we're seeing a lot of, innovative ideas happening to address these major global challenges that are related to sustainability, for example, climate change. So because we're feeling the heat, both literally and figuratively, in a more now than ever, that I think it's sped up this innovation in and then food, because food is, in the space of food and innovation, is a means of, tackling some of these issues in a way that, maybe other industries can't. And also the fact that, that the agricultural sector and food production contributes, 1/3 of the greenhouse gas emissions. It's a great place to start, and that so a lot of people can see themselves as a part of the solution through innovation. And so I think that the innovation is both driven and driving the sustainability agenda.
That's a great point. Yeah.
Right. Well, thank you both so much, and I'm conscious of time, so I shall wrap things up. I think I've certainly learned a lot in the last hour, and I'm sure a lot of our audience have. In particular, that I need to start a burger company if I'm going to impress you two. That's the.
I mean, to be honest, it's not so much with burgers. It's more the models, because to be completely frank, I don't like for me, a burger is a really something that I would consume seldomly. And I myself I prefer to consume a low meat or vegetarian diet. And I really, what I have a great appetite for is actually really like whole products. So I don't really need to eat a plant-based burger, but I understand that some people, in order to make that transition from consuming hamburgers, to more a diet that is more, inclusive of plants, and then that has a greater percentage of plants in the diet, that it's a gateway. So I think it's not necessarily something where we should eat only burgers for the rest of our lives. I think once again, dietary diversity and also a diet that is mindful of all the different food groups, and also being kind of following the best advice is eat plants and things should be in moderation. So this is I think, yeah, the burger is maybe more of seen as a lot of people as a vehicle for change, and that comes out a lot in North American culture, right?
It
Because the
is,
burger
and
is a
that's why
symbol
we're
of North
talking
American
about.
culture. Yeah. And so I think in other places, it comes out in other ways, right? So in let's say in Denmark, we see a lot of, plant-based like meatballs and things like that, because here you have kind of these that was part of the culture, and people want to get away from that, but they still want to eat things that they have eaten in the past. So it's a vehicle. It's and it's one way to kind of get mass change in terms of consumption.
Yeah.
So
It,
yes. So
I
burger or
know,
no
I
burger.
know exactly. In the UK, everything new is shaped as a sausage. That's
Yeah.
it's the burgers or sausages. If you can replace those, or kind of a bacon rasher of some various products. So yeah, I guess people consumers need to see something they recognise, even if the ingredient isn't what they recognise. But
Exactly.
yeah. But as I said, we really must wrap up, and I'm sure we'll have plenty more questions, Afton, if you'd like to join us again sometime, and we can explore other shaped products. um,
Fantastic.
so yeah, thank you very much for joining. The last thing I should ask is where people should head if they want to find out more about what you're doing and your work.
Yeah, so I have a website, and it's www.sustainablefoodsystems.blog, and there I'm posting about the work that I'm doing, and I have some links to some of my books, and a little bit more information about me.
Great,
And I
I'll
can
include.
be found on Twitter as well, at Afton Halloran. That's my alias.
Yeah. Okay. And I'll include it in the podcast notes. So hopefully wherever you're listening to this audience, then you'll be able to access those links and connect with Afton. So that leaves me just to thank you both for your time and your expertise, and to the audience, we shall see you on the next podcast. Thank you both.